right, welcome to Nicsmas in July. Now, I did Nicsmas 2021, and I said, you know what? This is the last Nicsmas, but we always adjust when new information reveals itself. That is one of our operating principles. And with the world in the state that it is in, and things become perhaps more obvious or easy to point out so that people can recognize it for themselves and come to their own conclusions, that is the time when I like to show up. I like to show up when I feel like there are things that cannot go unsaid. You do not have to adopt any of my opinions. Obviously, that should go without saying, but some people watch videos, and here's what I've learned. This is very important, and this is perfectly aligned with our day zero prep, is when you articulate your opinion, people get triggered. They get very triggered. The better you are at articulating your opinion, the more triggered people get. And so my hope is that I can articulate this as well as possible and give you some perspectives and insights. And people don't get triggered. They just use it as a reason to think about something and then do whatever with that information that they feel is most useful to them. And we'll talk about the whole idea of utility. Okay, so Nicsmas in July. This is an extension of Dala. Okay, and an explanation as to why people don't like and rebel against the best leaders, creating a doom loop of supporting and voting for the worst. We see this on a micro scale. Obviously, I'm heavily involved in crypto projects. We see it in crypto. We see it in small business, large business, and obviously we see it in politics. Everybody demands better leadership, and that is not actually how they behave. They do not behave as if they want better leadership. So first of all, if you're here live, let me know that you can hear me. And go ahead and hit a thumbs up if you want, just to let me know, because sometimes I do have microphone problems when I swap from one channel to another channel. Assuming you can hear me just fine without any glitching, I will carry on with this Nicsmas in July. This is just a preparation, okay? I'll get the full schedule out once I know that I will have time to deliver on it. Just waiting for a response. Let me know you can hear me. Looking in the chat. Cool. So Nicsmas in July, day zero. This is just a prep. It's a little bit of a refresher. It's just a little bit of the underpinnings, things that we need to agree upon for this to be worth your time or my time to deliver this, okay? Here's how it goes. Why Nicsmas in July? Because the cycle continues. Cycles, that's what they do. You can look at real estate. You can look at the stock market. You can look at politics. You can look at Ray Dalio's video of the changing world order. We have always operated in cycles, and that is by and large due to our behavior as humans. Nobody wants to hear that. We want to point at an authority figure and blame them, but it is our behavior that leads to these cycles. The evidence is clear. So if our behavior causes cycles, and cycles are sometimes bad, then we may think that the masses are not able to make decisions for themselves, which gives us two options: educate them better or take away their power to make decisions. I do not believe that the latter is a legitimate option. I do not believe that we can take power away from everybody, because that means some sociopath has decided that they know what's best for everybody, and that's a hard pill to swallow. My beliefs could always change, but as of right now, I do not believe a few people can dictate what everybody else does. So the only option we are left with is to educate better, and that is all I am trying to do. Not to say that here are the things that I know for sure, but here are some ways that I am thinking about things, and hopefully you can build upon them, make them your own, and come up with better solutions than I ever could. And also, why the F not? Why not? There's something about just having a oasis of stability or a reason in uncertain times. And if I have those, I go to people. And if I can provide that for a few people, it's totally worth it. All right? So this is how this Nicsmas format will work. Almost every day, I will start with a quote of the day. And then, obviously, there is a 6-word update. The 6-word update is a very powerful tool. It forces you to be concise, tell a story. See this? Alignment to playing my game, question mark? I don't know if that's supposed to be a question, but this forces us to think. There's a lot of power in brevity. Okay, so we'll talk about language. This is a great tool for developing more concise, more powerful language. 6 words, tell a story. What did you learn? What are you doing? How are you feeling? If you can get it down to 6 words, you're developing a skill. I recommend everybody do it. And then what you do is every so often you come back and you look at what other people's 6-word updates are. You will learn different perspectives, different insights, different ways to interpret what has been said here. Okay? It's not just what Nick says, but we can go and for Nicsmas, we had sometimes 100, 150, 200 6-word updates. You could go down and start crowdsourcing wisdom. I strongly recommend everybody do that. Now, here's the thing. I talked about this at Nicsmas. If you cannot do a 6-word update every day, if Nicsmas was 12 days, Nicsmas in July will be less than 12 days. If you can't do a 6-word update every day, meaning you're going to watch 2 hours or an hour or however long these videos are, so you watch 45 minutes of video, and you cannot take the time to make 6 words, then you are consuming far more than you're creating. And I'm not so sure you're probably the kind of person that reads all this exercise advice for hours and hours and hours and doesn't actually implement it. That's a problem. That's the intention intervention gap I talk about in my book. So if you watch an hour or 45 minutes and you can't do a 6-word update, that tells you a lot about yourself. Just be aware of that. I'm not suggesting you have to do it or there's anything to be done, but it's something to be aware of. How come I can watch 18 hours of content, which I think Nicsmas was almost 18 hours, but I can't take the time to actually use my brain and do the work to do the thing that was asked of me? That would probably explain a lot of the issues. I don't know. Journal about it. Think about it. I could be wrong, but that's my first guess. All this time consuming, and you can't do the same thing, small ask, couple minutes, every day for a few days in a row. Okay. Then I will open lots of loops. You know how that goes. I'll explain that in a minute. And oftentimes homework or resources suggestion, just, hey, I recommend that after hearing this, you do this. Of course, if I say journal and you don't like writing and you prefer interpretive dance, then, go do interpretive dance. Whatever fits your style. I'm going to have a recommendation, and by and large, it's going to fit my style or what I think most people jive with. But if I say, hey, go journal about this and you're more of a meditator, then go meditate on it. Go dance on it. Go write a song about it. Whatever fits your style. And that's the whole point of all of this, is stop abdicating responsibility to other people to tell you how to be and start understanding the underlying mechanisms and do it your way. All right. Comment here says, action organizes, so do your update. I strongly recommend 6-word updates in lots of areas of life. All right, so we're going to start with today's quote of the day, and this is kind of an underpinning a theme that we're going to talk about, because this is why we have such aggressive cycles. This is why we have huge upturns and huge downturns. It is all a version of seeking dopamine without effort will destroy a person or a civilization. It has been said, I can't remember who, historian, nations are born stoic and die Epicurean. Epicurean being seeking the dopamine. Do less work, seek more pleasure. It will destroy a person. It will destroy a community. It will destroy a nation. It's really important that we at least consider how this might be impacting us on a micro and a macro scale. Seeking dopamine will destroy a person. There's actually other versions of this that I'll be sharing over the next couple days that come from different eras, 1990s, 1970s, 1800s, 400 BC, all people recognizing the same thing. You want good news and you don't want to do work. And if you seek that, you will kick off a gnarly, gnarly cycle of a doom loop. Yep. That's why I'll get into that later. All right. And a 6-word update. So either now or at the end, the 6-word update is in this description. You just pop over here, drop your 6-word update, move on. Okay? Do the work. Or seeking dopamine without effort will destroy a person. Earn your good feels. Just earn them. It's worth it. All right, we'll have homework or resource suggestions at the end. I do have a couple today. And remember, just a quick review from Nicsmas 2021. Dala, which I actually got from, I used to have a company with Dr. Trevor Cashier. It was DILA. Directions for eating like an adult or don't eat like an asshole. Now we say directions for acting like an adult or don't act like an asshole. And go watch Nicsmas 2021 so you kind of understand that, half joking. But these are the ways that we're all kind of a-holes. I am totally guilty of it. The trick is to be less of an a-hole. And when we say a-hole, we mean acting in a way that gets you further away from what you say you want. So if you say that, man, I really just want to get my health in check, and then you eat 4 pints of ice cream, you're being an a-hole. Eating ice cream doesn't make you an a-hole. Behaving in a way that's diametrically opposed to what you say you want makes you an a-hole. I hope that distinction is clear. I cover it in Nicsmas 2021. And there's a lot of open loops and double loop learning. That means if I say something that is different, don't quickly try to decide whether I'm right or wrong, or you agree or disagree. Just let it sit there as an unknown, because what happens when you have an open loop or you allow yourself to double loop learn is you take a new idea, you don't have to accept it, but then you start recognizing it in the real world and you start forming a new opinion. Okay, so you're going to say things that you might say, well, that's wrong. Okay, well, don't decide that so quickly. Or you might go, yep, Nick's 100% right. Well, don't decide that so quickly either. Leave the loop open and allow new information to reveal itself, because when we close a loop, when we decide whatever we decide, yep, I'm a Democrat, done, then we stop being receptive to any new information from the other side that might be useful to us. And that is not super useful as a human, to just close yourself off to new information. So we want to have open loops. I'm going to actively try to open loops. I'm going to ask you not to close them. I know you're probably going to go Google and close them anyway, but for those of you that actually want to learn how to learn, we're going to try to open loops and then encourage you not to go down a rabbit hole and try to close that loop to get an answer. Just let it sit there and observe things. Okay? So here are some open loops. These are just statements that I strongly recommend you just think about and you don't try to prove them right or wrong yet. The victim is the most dangerous either position, orientation, or person to you, to society, and to posterity. The victim. And language is far more important than people give it credit. Now, that open loop is, you probably think that you give language a lot of credit. Probably going to destroy that notion, and maybe not. Rigid expectations will make your life so much worse. Have high expectations. It's fine to have high expectations, but not rigid ones. Leadership and authority. Conceptually, they must be separated. I'm going to address this all in the next couple days. Seeking solutions to technical problems often prevents the real issues from being solved. That's for you fact finders out there that think knowing everything is going to solve a problem. That is rarely the case. Most people vote for things to get worse. Seeking good news will almost always lead to more bad news in the future. Actively seeking good news. Okay? For example, media is it's a business. They make a lot of money. They have to pay the bills, and they do very well. Media is in the business of distributing confirmation bias, not delivering objective news. So if you are seeking good news, you will seek the things that you want to know, not the things that will make you better, because the things that make your life better are often the things you don't want to face. Let's be honest. Bad things can be very helpful, and good things can be very harmful. You can screenshot that if you want. Just think about it. You don't need answers. You don't need to come up with arguments one way or the other. Just think about those things, because I'm going to address them all. And we need to have an open mind so that we can discern how we feel about it with all of the new information that is revealed. Okay? And we're going to review Karpman's drama triangle really quick. I've done a ton of videos about this. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it. But Karpman's drama triangle is this right here. Right? It typically starts with somebody victimizing themselves or being victimized. And what happens is people say, hey, let me rescue you. Let me help you. Okay? A lot of times the rescuer is actually somebody that is a victim, but they feel like if they help somebody else, they can ignore their own problems and still feel productive. Now, for a rescuer and a victim to maintain their identities, so for the rescuer to have somebody to work on so they feel productive, the victim must maintain their identity. oftentimes, not always, oftentimes they will create a persecutor. They will create a villain to maintain their identities. Most villains are created by people that don't want to handle their own shit. There are people that will wage war on, like, Coca-Cola for having sugar in it and making them fat. Don't drink it, right? But that requires behavior modification. Well, what about our kids? Well, that requires you to be a parent, educate your kids, all this stuff, right? So oftentimes, that's not saying the persecutor or the villain doesn't have negative properties. It's saying it's that it is easier for people to take a stance of a victim and or a rescuer, point out a villain, and still feel productive without ever addressing their own stuff. So the most dangerous person, I think it's the next slide, beware the victim. The most dangerous person here is the victim, whether you allow yourself to be victimized or whether somebody tries to victimize you and you still have to allow that to happen. Because that gives rescuers something to do other than focus on fixing their own shit. Excuse my language. And in order for both of them to maintain that identity, there must be a villain. There is always a villain. You look at history, look at movies, there's always a villain. If it's not a big one, they'll find a small one. Because people need this if they're going to be comfortable. Right? So we have to beware the villain. Now, the victim. Now, here is the thing. We can point out the issues with all three of these. We can all play all of these roles. One person can play all these roles at different times, different areas. But this is where we have to realize, am I being a victim? Am I being a rescuer? And am I being a prosecutor? Prosecutors are just people that are angry and like telling everybody they're wrong about everything. But if you remove a persecutor or a villain, this tandem will find another one. They will find somebody to blame, right? Because this person is in the habit of blaming. That's how they became a victim. And this person needs this person to feel productive. So we can never get rid of persecutors because they'll always find another one. Okay? And there's always, most rescuers are victims that are trying to be productive. So by not allowing ourselves to be victimized and not victimizing ourselves, we can break this triangle. This is the only one, this is the only role really that we have control over breaking this triangle. So I hope that makes sense. So we got to be aware of the victim, and that's an underpinning. It's very important because this whole entire Nicsmas in July, we're going to point out how easy it is to fall into this victimhood and continue these cycles, right? Like, people love cycles when they're going up, but you have to understand on either side of a peak is a valley, and then people act surprised that it happened. We should not be surprised. Same cycles over and over. And now I'm making an assumption as we go through Nicsmas in July is that you actually want things to get better for yourself. You actually want things to get better for yourself. If we do not agree on that assumption, or if that's not an appropriate assumption for you, that save yourself the time. You're not going to enjoy however many hours we spend together. You're not. And when I say things get better for yourself, that means put yourself in a position where you have a higher probability of getting what you want. I underlined probability because language is important, and we're going to talk about that shortly. But if you do not actually want things to get better for yourself, and you're not willing to take any control over it, and you're not willing to deal in probabilities, you're not going to like anything that I say moving forward. And that's okay. You don't have to. You can choose to continue to watch, but you forfeit the right to complain and be mad because I just told you, right? Or you can just not watch. This is called responsibility. This is how, if I tell you, as an example, if you are this kind of person, you won't like this, and you are aware of that, and you are that kind of person, and you continue to watch it, and then you complain, you have victimized yourself. I have said, don't do this, or you will be unhappy, and you did it anyway, and now you're complaining that you're unhappy. You have victimized yourself. Okay? So higher probability of getting what you want. Today's open loops is what we're going to talk about today. Language and the process of thinking, right? The orientation that you take, because this is crucial to the upcoming day 1 and day 2 and subsequent days. So be prepared to think about language and think about just the process or orientation of how you go about things. Because language is important. Remember, I underlined probability. language is important. We're going to touch on the rocky road, asking what you mean to ask, answering the question that was asked, and just colloquial speech patterns. Just going to open these loops, okay? Answers will come later, I promise. You hopefully will come up with your own answers. Don't wait for mine, but let them come to you. Okay, so the rocky road from action to intention is a 1990 dissertation written by a Stanford student. I don't remember her name, but it was essentially the keystone piece of that is that she would go to couples, best friends, people that knew each other really well, and say, hey, if you sit across from each other and one of you taps a song on the desk, what do you think the probability that the person across from you will be able to guess what song it is? And they guessed something like 60%. Okay, and then they did it. Did all the tapping. Afterwards, they said, what do you think the probability now is that now that you've done it, how likely do you think they are to guess what song you were tapping? And they said something like 40%, so a little bit less, right? Now that we've done it, we realize that maybe we don't communicate it as well as we thought. The answer, and this has been replicated multiple times, falls somewhere between 1.5% and 2% of the time. 1.5% and 2% of the time. That means not only do we grossly overestimate our ability to communicate, we have also grossly overestimated how well we have communicated after it has been communicated. Grossly, like disgustingly. So, language is important. The reason people overestimate the tapping is when they're tapping a song, they have these accompaniments in their head. The instrumentals, the lyrics, all these things in their head. We'll call them accompaniments, okay? The other person does not. It is the same with language. Even when we use the same language, we'll say the English language here, I am going to overestimate my ability to communicate it to you, and even if I see you nodding your head or shaking your head and we have a dialogue, I'm still going to grossly over-communicate how effectively I have communicated. We need to understand this. Otherwise, we victimize ourselves when we go, what? But I told them that was the case. Well, maybe you think you told them, but they didn't have the accompaniments in their head that you did, so they actually didn't fully understand or hear what you thought you were saying. Strongly recommend, if you can get a copy of Rocky Road from Action to Intention, that you get one and you read it. Okay? So that's the tapping. Just be aware. There are accompaniments in people's head. How do you know when this is happening? Because they say the dialogue looks like this. Well, what do you mean? Well, you know what I mean. Right? As soon as you ever catch yourself going, well, you know what I mean, or hear somebody else go, you know what I mean by that, there's probably a huge gap between what you think you're communicating and what is actually being communicated effectively. Humans do it all the time. You know what I mean by that. Come on, you know what I'm talking about. No, we don't, actually. You're basically tapping on a desk thinking that I'm hearing a beautiful instrumental. So we got to be aware of that. Right? And then asking what you mean to ask and answering what is asked. Let me give you a few examples. What is protein? Protein is a macromolecule made of like long and medium chain amino acids. Okay. What is crypto? Crypto is a digital currency that is meant to be a medium of exchange. What is blockchain? Blockchain is this is me answering the question that is asked. Blockchain is the technology that stores and transfers the digital currency that is cryptocurrency, and it also stores information in blocks instead of columns and rows. Do Oreos make you fat? No, Oreos do nothing. They're inanimate objects. They just sit there. Okay? Do you see a few things here? One, most people don't actually answer the question that was asked. Right? When somebody goes, what is protein? It's the building block of muscle. You are not answering the question that was asked. The question was, what is protein? Okay? What is cryptocurrency? Well, it's this new thing you can invest in, and it goes, it's really volatile and it goes much higher. Like, that is not what crypto is. Those are some of the properties you might experience as an investor. Okay? What is blockchain? Do Oreos make you fat? Yeah, Oreos make you fat. Here's why. Because here's all the ingredients. Okay? So people are often not answering the question that was asked. They have accompaniments in their own head. So if you say, what is protein? I might hear, should I eat more protein? Is protein good for me? What happens if I eat too much protein? What happens if I don't eat any protein? How do I know if I'm getting enough protein? I'm assuming, based on the accompaniments in my head, that's what you're asking, but that's not what you're asking. You may mean to ask, how do I know which foods have protein in them? And I answer, protein is a building block of muscle. You see how easy it is to have a conversation with no real communication happening? So the skill we want to develop is asking what we mean to ask. So it might be, how do I know which foods have protein in them in a sufficient amount? Should I invest in cryptocurrency given my goals and priorities? Can the blockchain improve my business? Is there a way for me to eat Oreos without getting fat? Those are different questions with different answers. So this is just to highlight how poor communicators we are and how important language is. Nobody is actually asking the question they mean to ask, and very few people are answering the question that was asked. This gives us the illusion of communication. And then we're confused. Why did this politician not deliver? Why did my spouse not follow through? Why did this business not do what they said they would do? Well, because you didn't actually communicate. You asked a question you didn't mean to ask, and they answered something other than the question you asked. There was no actual communication happening. So I hate to be that guy, but observe it. Like, open loop. Just watch. Watch when somebody asks a question. Whoa. When somebody asks a question, and just watch the conversation that happens. Right? You'd be amazed at how, just being aware of it. Okay? So what I'm going to encourage us to do, and I'm going to do it as well, as I'm going to try to say what I mean to say. And I hope the questions are, if you have questions, you're working on asking what you mean to ask. And on my end and on your end, I hope we do the best we can to actually answer the question that was asked. Now, if you ask a question, what is protein? And I tell you it's a macromolecule that is made up of a multiple or few long chains or medium chains of amino acids, and you don't like the response and you get triggered, then you have to realize that you didn't ask the right question. This happens all the time. People get very upset at people that answer the question that was asked because, you know what I mean. But we don't know what you mean. Nobody knows what you mean unless you say specifically what you mean. Okay, so language is important. Then we have our colloquial speech patterns. This is a version of self-victimization. Oreos make me fat. Now, in this context, we can probably deduce that you actually mean you don't keep Oreos in your house because you don't have the self-control to only eat one or two of them. You're going to eat a whole sleeve. But your lack of self-control or your inability to measure things has nothing to do with Oreos. This inanimate thing that literally does nothing makes me fat. This language implies that Oreos somehow sneak into your house and while you are sleeping or whatever, shove themselves down your throat against your will. And that is not the case. So you see this in this language, this ongoing self-victimization. XYZ makes me fat. Whatever makes me tired. Yada, yada, yada. But that's not effective communication. Oreos do not make you fat. Exercise doesn't work for me. Again, self-victimization. And I'll tell you why, one of the reasons why we think this way and we use this language. What you mean to say is what I have done in the past has not gotten me the outcome that I expected. Now we actually have to look at, was my outcome was my expected outcome reasonable? And was there actually like any behavior change? Did I actually behave in a way that I should expect that outcome? That has nothing to do with exercise. Nothing to do with exercise. Okay? So to point at it and say, that's bad, that makes me fat, that makes me tired, that makes me poor, that doesn't work for me, this doesn't work for me, you're just victimizing yourself over and over and over and over, avoiding the real conversation. What could I have done better? I really like Oreos, but historically I gain weight when I have them in the house. So how can I modulate my behavior so that I can eat Oreos without having the weight gain? Is it possible? These are harder conversations that modify our behavior, but they give us control. They're helpful. They tell us how to navigate the world in a way that gives us a higher probability of getting what we want. Can we stay in decent shape and eat Oreos? Maybe. But if we sit there and we point the finger at the inanimate object, then no. It's dogmatic. Okay? We'll talk about that. So these speech patterns are very, very important. And if you just observe, you will see how often people victimize themselves over and over and over, which is just saying, I give up, I want the world to be better, but I'm not doing anything that modifies my own behavior in a way to give me a higher probability of getting what I want. So language is important. It's very important. I catch myself all the time when, that was not the best language. And no guilt or shame over it. I just try to do better. That's the goal. Okay. And it's very important when we go back to what things are, right? What is protein? Do you actually want to know what protein is, or do you want to know how to use it to get what you want? So the question is it technical or useful? Typically we say valid or useful, but in the context of Nicsmas, something technical, because that'll make more sense as we go on. Is it technical? Is it technically correct, or is it useful? So if it's dark and you're standing in your kitchen and you can't see anything and you want to make snacks, do you want somebody to tell you how electricity works as a matter of factly and be technically correct? Or do you want the action with the highest probability of turning the electricity on so you can make your frickin' snacks? You want somebody to tell you how electricity works? How the power grid works? How light bulbs work? Or do you want somebody to show you where the light switch is? Language is important. There's a huge difference between technical and useful. So for this upcoming video series, I will be focused on useful. I will provide some technical background and I will show you the resources where you can find it. But ultimately, if you want it to not be dark anymore, my hope is that I can show you where the light switch is. Useful. Okay? I don't really care to tell you about how electricity works, because my value, and everybody's different, I derive my value to the world is to try to be as useful as possible, not to be as technically right as possible. That sounds like a miserable existence. But to each their own. Okay? Technical or useful? That's the question. Okay. Now we're going to talk about a dogmatic orientation versus scientific orientation, because language is important. Language is very, very important. And these are the two. Now, I had different language for this, but I just picked up Dr. Trevor Kashey's stuff. Trevor has been a huge influence on me. We lived together. We carpooled together. We shared an office together. We built a business together. So I'm heavily influenced by the way he thinks. And he's developed some language that I am now adopting. So I had different language, but I'm going to use his. Dogmatic orientation. He says dogmatic thinking versus scientific thinking. He's a scientist. He got his PhD in metabolic chemistry when he was like 23. So he's a scientist at heart. And this is where language, like the distinction in language, becomes clear. Dogmatic versus scientific. Okay, and we are going to encourage a scientific orientation in everything we do. Okay. Dogmatic thinking has rigid expectations about outcomes. I must lose 20 pounds. Bitcoin must reach $100,000 by end of December. A very rigid way things have to happen in order for you to be okay. What happens is reality does not meet those expectations, and I'll explain why in a minute. So we are outraged and we become victims. But all the influencers said it would reach 100K. I'm outraged. Now I have no money. Well, you came from a place of a rigid expectation. Dogmatic thinking is governed by absolutes, black and white, and all or nothing thinking. You either win or you lose. Bitcoin's either 100K or it's not. I either lose 20 pounds or I don't. There is no gray area. There is no flexibility in outcome. This is a dogmatic way of thinking. Extremes, okay? Political parties, religions, super opinionated people tend to be dogmatic. That is not good. And over the next couple of days, I'll show you more and more ways this really hits on a micro and a macro scale. Scientific orientation, scientific thinking, has a wide variety of potential outcomes with different probabilities. Okay, it's governed by risk and probabilities. So you can see this statement right here is a byproduct of a scientific orientation. We're coming from risk and probability. Everything we talk about in the wolf den, if you're in the wolf den or searching to you, it's risk and probability. It's not guaranteed. Guarantees are dogmatic. Okay? So a wide variety of potential outcomes with different probabilities. Language is very, very, very important when we're talking about how we are thinking through a problem, the risks, the probabilities, etc., etc. Now here's the interesting thing. It's very human of us to do the exact opposite of what makes sense, because it makes perfect sense to us at the time. A dogmatic orientation is uncontrolled and mostly random. The variables are not isolated. Measurements are half-assed or non-existent. So, for example, you wake up and you decide, I need to lose 20 pounds. And you kind of follow the plan, but you don't live in a vacuum. And yet the outcome, the rigid expectations. It has to go exactly as I expected. I need to lose 25 pounds by this date. I need to make this much money by this date. My relationship has to be in exactly this place by this date. There's only one or two acceptable outcomes, even though our process is a mess. We do not have rigidity in the process. We expect rigidity in the outcome. Okay? The result is victimhood and outrage, because things do not end up perfectly as expected, and this orientation leads to harmful thinking. I made a mistake, therefore I am a mistake. I lost, therefore I'm a loser. Is a harmful, I did not lose 20 pounds, therefore dieting doesn't work. Those are harmful results. Zero help to us. It just spins us out into worse and worse and worse situation. Okay, now a scientific orientation has a controlled process. A good scientist basically does operate in a vacuum. The variables are isolated. Everything is peer reviewed. There's blind, double blind, all this stuff. Okay, the measurements are as precise as possible. Extreme precision. And even so, the expected outcome has a wide variety of potential or expected outcomes with different probabilities. Different probabilities because a scientist understands that's how the world works. There's some probability of this and some probability of this and some probability of this. So we need to control the process and we need to see what happens. When we have controlled the process and we see what happens without being attached to an outcome, we call this learning. We've learned something. In this scenario, this happens. We can do it 100 more times, and we can see, does it happen all 100 times, or does it happen 90% of the time? If it only happens 90% of the time, what determines that variance? Is there something different? Is it completely random? Now we're learning. We're getting power over the outcome. This is helpful. We have increased. Instead of saying, this needs to work, it didn't work, this doesn't, my life is over and everything sucks, we say, we think this will work. It's a hypothesis. We think this will work. We controlled it, and this happened. What have we learned? This is helpful. Okay, so you see how it's really interesting that the humans that have very little control over their environment, their day-to-day, and their behavior expect rigid outcomes, which is nonsensical. And the people that truly understand how to isolate variables and control the process understand that the outcomes will be random. They will probably fall within a range of probabilities, but they're still going to be random. You can absolutely flip a coin and get heads 3 times in a row. That's a random outcome. That's not the highest probability, but it does happen. And now we're learning things. Okay? So I hope that makes sense. We got to recognize when we are coming from a dogmatic place. So just some notes, and this is directly from Dr. Kashi. I basically mostly just transcribed his notes. Dogmatic orientation is arbitrary and maintains rigid outcomes. I need to lose 20 pounds in 12 weeks. Those numbers are completely arbitrary. There is no, show me the preponderance of evidence that suggests that trend makes sense. It doesn't exist because it's arbitrary. You made it up. I need to make $1 million business. I want to be $1 million business owner. Completely arbitrary. That has nothing to do with anything. You just picked a number that sounded good. I need to be $1 million business owner by the end of the year. That is an arbitrary number and an arbitrary timeline. It doesn't make any sense. You're just picking something to pass or fail, right? We much rather say these are the things I want to get closer to, and by, over time I want to get closer to these things. It makes a little more sense. Specific things must happen. I must make $1 million by the end of the year. When executed, so you grow your business, you go on your diet, you play with crypto, only pre-approved, even though they're arbitrary, pre-approved outcomes are acceptable. $1 million or more. That's the only acceptable outcome. Completely arbitrary. It's ridiculous. Expectations are frequently violated and seldom, if ever, met. This, you have just arbitrarily made yourself or dogmatically made yourself a failure. Expectations are frequently violated and seldom, if ever, met because they were arbitrary and rigid. This is impulsive and destructive and rigid as an operating system. This is impulsive, destructive. If you know anybody, again, no judgment, just an observation. If you know anybody that is extreme religious, extreme political, extreme anything on any side, they are impulsive, destructive, and rigid. Something doesn't go their way because they determined some time ago it needed to happen this way, and they'll be out on the streets throwing bricks at cars. That's not a Dala. Don't act like an asshole. That's not a logical human way to react, but it's a byproduct of having a dogmatic orientation. Interestingly, the rigidity lies in the expected outcome, but the rigidity is not expected in the process. I put an LOL there because this is really silly when you actually look at it. I expect this exact outcome, but most people kind of half-ass the process. They really do. Okay? In other words, a dogmatic orientation is working against time and randomness. Time and randomness are not on your side because the arbitrariness of your whatever outcome, expected outcome, makes time your worst enemy. I need this by this date. Now you're working against time. And the fact that only pre-approved outcomes are acceptable makes randomness your worst enemy. What do we talk about all the time in Nicsmas and otherwise? Keeping time and randomness on our side. So you see right here, all or nothing thinking. Arbitrary goals and timelines. You're not going to get there. You are, for whatever reason, swimming upstream. Okay, now let's look at some notes on a scientific orientation. It is rigorous in its structure and its process. Watch a scientist work. They are there's a lot of rigor in the measurements and just controlling the variables because that's what you have to do if you care about something. You don't just willy-nilly it and expect an outcome that is pre-approved by you. Yeah? The variables are controlled, but it allows for flexibility in the outcome. All outcomes are conceivable and acceptable because that is how life works. Scientists know that. Even though they live in a lab and they operate in a vacuum, they still conceive of and accept all outcomes. Think about that. Okay? Expectations are seldom violated because all outcomes are conceivable, and sometimes they're met, and that is awesome. I have a hypothesis. I've tested a bunch of times. Boom, hypothesis true. That's great. But we actually sometimes learn more when our hypothesis is false, because then we have to update our operating system. We have to accumulate new knowledge that is helpful. It's rational, constructive, and flexible. And it is probability and risk-based. Probability and risk-based. Not all or nothing, black or white, fact or fiction. So again, language is important. Not you will get what you want, but the highest probability that you get what you want. Those are very different statements. One is dogmatic. The other one is scientific. And they're always in flux because new information always reveals itself. We know this. We know that what we believed about medicine 200 years ago was ridiculous. Now, in 200 years, they'll probably look at what we know about medicine and think we're ridiculous. This happens. So we have to understand it's always in flux. New information reveals itself. By adopting a scientific orientation, we are keeping time and randomness on your side, which is what we want because they are undefeated. Time has always passed and randomness has always happened. Unexpected something has always happened to everybody all the time. Okay, so that's how we keep time and randomness on our side. It's another way of saying that. I've probably showed 15 different ways of saying this by now. Okay, so these are the things I want you to think about as we get into Nicsmas in July, because I'm going to challenge a lot of social structure. I'm going to challenge a lot of things maybe you think about yourself and think about others. And we're going to tie it back to really, well, how would we look at this from a scientific orientation? Well, that could be true, but look at the language we're using. So can we develop a better language to maybe convey something more useful? Right? So resources and homework. I strongly recommend you check out Teaching Smart People How to Learn if you haven't already. If you're in my world, you probably read it already because I talk about it all the time. It's by Harvard Business Review. If you can get your hands on The Rocky Road from Action to Intention, I recommend that. It's very difficult, but sometimes people can dig it up on the internet. It took me a very long time to find my copy, and I love it. And what I recommend you do is journal. Just reflect on the language that you use on a day-to-day basis. Just open the loop. You don't have to come to any conclusions, whether it's good language, bad language, effective language, ineffective language, high efficacy, low efficacy. It doesn't matter. We just want to be aware of it. Things like, are you actually asking the questions you mean to ask? Are you answering the questions being asked of you? Or are you answering something else because you have the accompaniments in your head that you assume they also have? So you are making a leap of logic when somebody says, hey, what is protein? Are you assuming they're saying, should I eat more protein? But that is a different question. We cannot be helpful to ourselves or others if we are asking the wrong question and answering a completely different question and thinking that that is somehow effective dialogue. Are you victimizing yourself in your colloquial speech? Oreos make me fat. Exercise doesn't work. Things that anytime you're like, well, that person can do it and they're fine, but when I do it, I'm not fine. You're probably victimizing yourself. Right? That person eats Oreos and they stay nice and lean. I eat Oreos and I get fat. Well, you know, there's a lot of variables in their behavior and your behavior that you may not be aware of that may contribute to that. So let's talk about something useful. How is your behavior? And do you want to be technically correct or do you want to be useful? It's a very important question that you ask yourself as we go on this journey together. Are you going to spend your time trying to be technically correct, explaining how electricity works, or you want to be useful? You want to turn the freaking light switch on? Very different orientations. That will determine how useful the time we have together is, and as we build, you know, if we have a community and you guys are in different communities and you're talking, this will determine how useful that community becomes. How many people orient towards scientific thinking and being useful? The network effect of that, the collective momentum of that is through the roof if people are willing. All right, so next, I don't know the exact schedule yet because I got to figure out my schedule, but we're going to deep dive into some deep stuff. It'll challenge you. It'll make you think. And whether you agree or disagree, I'm totally cool with either. So sometimes people think I don't like when I disagree with them, especially in writing. But the reality is they're not communicating effectively, and they get frustrated when I try to communicate effectively. And it's, I don't know, people don't like specificity for whatever reason. So we cannot have an effective dialogue if you're not aware of the way we communicate, right? Like if you ask me a question, I'm gonna answer the question you ask. And you're going to get frustrated because you're going to go, oh, he knows what I mean. Well, I'm not going to make that assumption. That's irresponsible. Okay? Or if you're coming from a dogmatic orientation, if there's only one way to do things and there's only one acceptable outcome in every scenario or any given scenario, it's not going to be a great dialogue. It's not going to be a great dialogue. Okay? So we're going to get into some stuff. And I encourage you to just think about where you're coming from, at least for the next couple days, so that we can participate together, have a dialogue, be useful, and we can all walk away with completely different solutions or conclusions and still like totally respect each other, right? That's the goal. That's it. Nicsmas Day 0. I will get the schedule to the rest of you. Make sure you are in the Telegram group. It'll be posted there. And hit your 6-word update. I cannot wait to read them.